Well, hello, and welcome to Dusklore, where some of the darkest stories get a voice. If you enjoy what we do here, consider supporting us on Patreon. Subscribers get early access to every video, and some exclusive stories, too. You'll find the link in the description. And with that, let's begin today's creepy night shift stories. I've worked the night shift at the Marigold Motor Inn for 6 years now. It's one of those rundown highway-side motels with a flickering neon sign and a vending machine that eats dollars like it's hungry for them. You get all kinds of people through here. Truckers, drifters, people trying to disappear. But I'd never been scared of any of them. Not until the man in room 12. The first time I remember anything weird happening was a cold Tuesday night in the dead of winter. I was scrolling feeds on my phone, bored out of my mind. The place was dead and I had already finished everything but waiting for any stragglers to ring the bell. About midway through my shift, around 2 a.m. or so, I glanced up and saw the light on from room 12 through the front window of the office. The rooms are all shoved together in a sort of flat U-shape that wraps around the office. The office itself is a small separate building with parking spaces surrounding it, and the front of the building has a clear view out to the middle section of rooms. I checked the log to make sure I didn't somehow miss something, but that day's page was blank. We shouldn't have had any guests. I stepped outside, my breath curling in the air like smoke, and crossed the lot toward room 12. The light in the window was that pale yellow kind that makes everything inside look a little bit sickly. I could swear I saw someone standing just behind the curtain. Not moving, not pacing, just standing there, half shadowed by the thin fabric. I knocked on the door. The shadow seemed to flicker slightly, but nobody answered and I didn't hear a sound coming from the room. So I knocked again, harder this time, with the side of my hand like a cop in a TV show. This time, I heard footsteps behind the door, but they were trailing off like someone was briskly walking away. At this point, I figured somebody probably left the door unlocked and some wanderer had found their way through it. I decided I was going to go in there and sort it out, so I whipped out my key ring loudly in the hopes that whoever this was would hear it and come out. They didn't, so I announced myself and slipped my key into the lock. But as soon as I did, the light inside cut off. My hand froze on the key. The sudden darkness behind the curtain felt heavier than it should have, like it was pressing up against the glass from the inside. I waited, listening, but the silence was too perfect. No shuffle, no breathing, not even the hum of the old radiator that usually ticked when that heat kicked on. Still, I turned the key, and the door swung open on its own. A darkness poured out that was so dense you'd think the light, the one that was just here moments ago, was edited out in real time. I flipped the switch on the wall next to the door, but it was no use. I looked around, trying to see anything beyond the tip of my nose, but I couldn't. I called out once more and stepped inside. Then, as if it hadn't just shut itself off like a horror movie trope, the light turned back on. In the room there was nothing. Well, nothing out of place anyway. Just a bed whose sheets were tucked into perfectly folded corners, an old TV that should have been replaced years ago, and a clear line of sight into an empty bathroom. The only thing that stood out was a faint smell, like dust and lavender, the kind you get from an old attic where no one had been in years. I checked the closet, even looked under the bed, but there wasn't a single sign anyone had been there. No bags or shoes, and no coat. Just the hum of the mini-fridge and the sharp sting of silence pressing in behind it. I laughed a little, trying to shake the unease. Maybe I'd imagined the figure in the window. Maybe someone did slip in and out without me noticing. But then, I stepped outside and looked back toward the office. And someone was standing at the window, my window, watching me from the inside. I ran back to the office as fast as I could, slammed the door open, and nothing. Again. At this point, I thought I was losing my mind. I was sure I'd seen something, but then where was it? I don't subscribe to that whole ghost nonsense, but what else could it have been? Uneasy and slightly shaken, I sat back down behind the check-in counter and jotted a note for myself, just in case. Just in case this wasn't the result of sleep deprivation or something. When I finished, I just went back to scrolling on my phone, and the rest of the night was boring but normal. I had a few encounters like this. They were all just as creepy, but overall benign. Well, until what I'll call the incident. It started like any other slow night. Quiet lot, dead phone lines, not a single soul checked in. Around 3 a.m., I glanced out of the front window and sure enough, room 12's light was on, again. But this time, the figure wasn't behind the curtain. It was outside, standing just beyond the glow of the light seeping through the window, motionless, facing me. And even from that distance, I swear it was smiling. Strange enough, it still looked like a shadow, though the light cascading through it made it shimmer like whatever it was made of was moving. I cracked open the office door and shakily called out to it, half in fear, half hoping that it would just go away, even though I knew it wouldn't. My frozen breath drifted across the silent lot in the frigid air, but the figure didn't move. I stepped outside and reluctantly began moving towards it, all the while continuing to call out, continuing to tell it to go away, continuing to wonder if I'd finally snapped and lost my last shred of sanity. I got maybe 10 steps out before the light in room 12 blinked out like a candle in the wind. The figure vanished with it. No sound, no movement, just gone. As if it had never been there at all. I stood there, chest tight, heart thudding in my ears, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the night swallowed everything again. Just the crunch of ice under my shoes and the dull hum of the vending machine back at the office. I turned back, ready to call it a night and maybe my career too, when I had seen that the front door of room 12 was wide open, and the television inside was blaring white noise loud enough to rattle the window. And with that, I was done playing games. Maybe it was a cruel prank, maybe some sicko with a screw loose was trying to send me to an early grave. I didn't care. I whipped out my phone, dialed 911, and began explaining the madness that was unfolding. But I stopped mid-sentence when I heard it. A blood-curdling scream rang out from room 12, loud enough for the operator to hear it. But she had heard it. Whatever this was, it was real. As terrifying a thought as that was, what was happening was real. Against my better judgment, I ran into room 12, squeezing my phone like the person on the line was my only anchor to reality. Once inside, my stomach dropped and my heart started pounding, as if it were trying to escape. Blood covered the walls and painted a silhouette on the previously pristine white bedsheet. I didn't have time to process it, though. The scream hadn't come from the room itself. It had come from the TV. When I turned to look at it, the face of a man drenched in shadow was smiling back at me as he began smashing his fists against the TV screen from the inside. I stumbled backward, dropping my phone, and it cracked against the floor as the scream warped into ear-splitting static. The screen warped with every hit from the inside, glass spider webbing with cracks but never quite shattering. The man inside stopped and stared, head cocked to one side like a dog trying to understand what it's seeing. And slowly, painfully slowly, he raised a hand and pointed directly at me. I bolted, but before I could even get to the door, I heard a loud crash behind me. Shards of glass flew past me with so much force, they embedded themselves in the wall. I whipped around to see it standing over me. frozen like a weeping angel caught mid-movement. I started to scream, but I didn't get the chance to finish. It reached out and darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke up, I was handcuffed in the office. After making sure I was awake, an officer read me my rights before shoving me in the back of a squad car and hauling me away. They say I stole someone's life in that room. They say I was alone, and that my fingerprints were smeared across the crimson-laden walls. But they never found any remains. Nobody believes me about the man on the TV. They all think I'm insane. But I swear on my life, I'm not what they say I am. There's something out there that's far worse than any human monster ever could be. A while ago, I worked nights at a half-rundown old gas station near a small town in Arizona. The graveyard shift was always quietest between 2 and 4 a.m. That uncanny lull where the world seemed to forget it was alive. That's when he would come in. Same time every night, 2:17 on the dot. Always wearing the same gray hoodie, damp at the hem like he'd just stepped out of a storm no one else could see. He never spoke, never bought anything either, just wandered the aisles, dragging his fingers along shelves like he was searching for something he couldn't name. The first few nights, I thought he was just another townie with insomnia no one talked to. But by the third night, I started to feel like I was the one who didn't belong. He always seemed to be staring at the floor with a look of sadness across his face, like he was ashamed of something, and he would never respond to anything, even when asked a direct question. "Sir, can I help you find anything?" Nothing. No answer. He just shuffled away down another aisle. I stopped trying after that point. The man clearly didn't want to be bothered, and he hadn't bothered me really. It was a little strange, sure, but honestly, I had almost started to appreciate his company. After a week or so, he started sliding notes across the counter on his way in. The first one just said, "Thank you for your kindness." It was written in small, deliberate letters, like each one had been pressed down with just enough pressure to matter. I didn't know what to make of it, but I kept the note under the till, figuring it was just some oddball's way of saying hello. The next night, he left another. "You're not supposed to be here." That one stayed in my apron pocket all shift, weighing more than it should have. I told myself it was just a weird way of making conversation, that maybe he was one of those types who couldn't talk but still needed a connection. But something about the way he stared, always at the same spot on the floor, started gnawing at me. The more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. The oddly specific time he'd show up, his weird behavior, and now, cryptic notes? I needed answers. I started trying to find ways to follow him around the store without being too obvious. I'd stock shelves close by, sweep up invisible dirt at the end of the aisle he was in, or casually check price tags in a cooler he'd just walked near. After a few days of this, it was clear that he wasn't aimlessly wandering the aisles. In fact, he wasn't wandering at all. He followed the same path through the store each and every day, looked at the same items, and even made the same exact movements, right down to the way he blinked. The only real differences were when he slid a new note onto the counter every day, and when any type of confrontation or interaction caused him to scurry away. I watched a security tape from one of those nights just to confirm I wasn't imagining it. But that only made it worse. On the monitor, his movements looked glitched, like frames were missing, like he was being puppeteered by a broken VCR. The tape jittered every time he turned his head, and when I froze it at the exact moment he looked up from the floor for the first time, I swear to God, he was staring straight into the camera, and the timestamp read exactly 2:17 a.m. That night, The note he left was folded tighter than the others, edges worn like it had been opened and closed 100 times before it ever touched my hand. It said, "Stop watching." If I wasn't scared before, that note pushed me over the edge. From then on out, I had to be more careful. A lot more careful. I still wanted answers, but I also didn't want to end up as another statistic if he snapped. It was time to get creative. I rigged one of the display phones on the counter to record video, propped it up between packs of gum and an old box of painkillers nobody ever bought. It had a clear view of the front entrance and a partial angle on the aisle he always walked. I didn't even look near it while he was still there. I let it run and checked it after he left. When I played it back, my hands went cold. He didn't walk in. One frame he was gone, the next he was standing inside. Like the universe had just dropped him there. No motion, no transition, just pop. Like a bad edit. That night's note was thicker than usual. It had several pages stapled together. The first page read, "Don't be afraid. You're not in danger. But you need to remember." Remember what? I asked myself. For as long as I could remember, my life had been as basic and boring as it could be. But then I thought about it for a moment. What could I actually remember? I strained to think of anything, but all I could picture in my head was that damned gas station in my tiny apartment. In fact, I couldn't remember leaving the gas station or my apartment at all. Ever. But I must have left at some point, right? I had to travel between the two, didn't I? The note continued. "You don't belong here. You're not supposed to be here. And I'm sorry for that. You were always so kind to me. But you need to remember." On the back of the note, in huge script that was carved into the page by the force of the pen that etched it there, a message simply read, "Who am I?" I didn't sleep that day. I just sat on the edge of my bathtub in a dingy apartment I didn't remember moving into, staring at that question like it might answer itself if I looked long enough. Who was he? I opened my contacts. Nothing. No call logs, no text, just a single alarm set for 10:45 p.m. every night, labeled work. I tore through the apartment, looking for clues, photos, receipts, mail, anything. But the cabinets were bare. The fridge was empty, no bills, no dishes, no signs of life aside from me, standing there, alone. The only thing I found was a gas station uniform, folded neatly on the bed, still smelling faintly of motor oil and burnt coffee. When I got to work that night, he was already inside. His hood was down, and he looked me in the eyes as I walked in. Recognition flickered through my mind. I knew that face, but from where? His neutral expression slowly shifted to a solemn one as he saw the wheels turning in my head. I still didn't quite know who he was, but I think he knew I'd figure it out soon as he, for the first time since this all started, began walking towards me. Except that he wasn't walking towards me. He was walking towards the door. I tried to ask where he was going, but he just shoved a crumpled note in my hand as he brushed past me. "Come back to us. It's time to wake up," it read. The moment my eyes hit that last word, the lights inside the gas station flickered violently, every bulb buzzing like a swarm of angry wasps. And then, everything froze. The coffee pot mid-drip, the flicker of the open sign in the window. Even the sound of the cooler motor stopped cold. I couldn't move, not at first. It was like my whole body had been paused. And then something cracked, not outside, but inside me. A pressure behind my eyes, a snap in my thoughts, like the dam holding something back had finally broken. Images flooded my mind, all at once. Flashing red lights, screaming, cold tile, a man in a gray hoodie, yelling something I couldn't hear over the ringing in my ears. And pain. So much pain. And then my vision fading to red, then black. I opened my eyes to find myself lying in a hospital bed, doctors and nurses rushing in and out of the room, shining bright lights in my eyes and saying words that didn't make much sense. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was my only constant as I tried to decode the scene unfolding around me. As the next few days drifted by, friends and family came to see me in my hospital room between visits from doctors and the many, many tests I was subjected to. As they did, I began to piece together what had really happened to me through stories and, eventually, the CCTV tape. The man in the gray hoodie was very much real, but he hadn't been my savior. He had been the cause of my pain. 2 months prior, I had been working yet another mundane night shift, solo at the gas station. At approximately 2:17 a.m., the man in the gray hoodie had entered the store and began wandering the aisles. After a few minutes, he approached the counter and pointed a gun at me as the camera captured its matte black shape shaking in his hands. It was clear from the CCTV footage that the store was being robbed, and the police report states that at 2:26 a.m., I had pushed the panic button under the counter. Seconds after I did, the man in the gray hoodie pulled the trigger. Watching the tape was surreal, like it had happened to someone else. But no, it was me. And it was me lying there in a hospital bed with a half-healed wound on my head watching a man nearly take my life from me. I don't remember much of what happened, but the tape was enough to fill in the blanks. And the scar I wear will always be here if I forget. I've been the night janitor at the local elementary school for 8 years now. Just me, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the occasional echo of my own footsteps down those empty halls. It was a quiet job, boring sometimes, but that's exactly why I took it. No kids, no noise, no surprises. That changed last Tuesday when I found a door I'd never seen before. An old steel thing tucked behind the boiler in the far corner of the basement. It wasn't locked, and when I opened it, I saw a hallway that shouldn't have been there. Narrow, dim, and lined with rusted lockers and crumbling textbooks that looked like they'd been printed before my grandfather was born. Curiosity got the best of me and I stepped inside, my shoes peeling off the slightly sticky floor as I strode in. Everything in that place was far older than the rest of the school, and I wondered how I hadn't seen such an obvious door before. As I walked, I found a half-crumpled newspaper nailed to a corkboard between a set of lockers and a classroom door. The date on it read August 3rd, 1923. Bemused, I read down to the first headline. Midwood Elementary tragedy claims 10 lives. It went on to describe how some horrific incident had taken place, but nobody seemed to know what exactly had happened. Only that it brought grief to a once peaceful town, and that an investigation had been launched. But Midwood was the school whose basement door I'd just stepped through, and I'd never heard of any tragedy happening there. I stared at that headline for what felt like minutes, my eyes tracing every letter like they might rearrange themselves into something less disturbing. When I finally turned away, the hallway behind me seemed longer than it was before, like the door I had come through had drifted further down, swallowed by the dark. I shook it off, chalked it up to stress or poor lighting, and tried the nearest classroom door. It opened without a sound. Inside, desks were arranged in perfect rows, each one with a yellowed worksheet neatly placed on top. The names filled in with old-fashioned cursive I couldn't quite make out. But the blackboard had something fresh written on it. It said, "Don't stay. past the second bell. Just then, a sound ripped through the silence, nearly causing me to jump clean out of my skin. The first bell. Still shaking from the shock when it stopped, I reasoned with myself that it must have been a coincidence and that the note scrawled on the blackboard was probably just the teacher making sure their students got to the next class on time. While I was certainly creeped out, everything else in the classroom was relatively normal. Well, aside from the fact that it seemed like everyone had got up and left mid-class. Like they'd all just disappeared. The chairs were slightly pulled out, pencils resting mid-sentence on notebooks, and a glass of water on the teacher's desk, half full, or half empty. A sick feeling gnawed at my gut as I backed out of the room and turned down the next hallway, hoping to find my way back. But the corridor didn't lead where it should have. Instead of the walkway to the boiler room, I found myself standing in front of a row of lockers, each one identical to the next, except one. One of them was slightly ajar, and behind the thin slit of open metal, I could see an eye staring out. It blinked slowly, then vanished. I sucked in a breath of stale air before flying down the hallway, echoes of my footsteps filling my ears. But with each and every step, I heard another much heavier stomping sound. I didn't dare turn around to see what it was. I just kept running, kept weaving through those surreal hallways that bent and curved unnaturally, like pathways in an Escher painting. When I thought I was in the clear, I ducked into the nearest classroom, closing the door gently behind me. I slumped to the floor, heart slamming into my ribs, and heard the distinct crackle of a PA system coming to life. "I know you saw me in the locker," a child's voice said over the loudspeaker. "You must leave, quickly, before it finds you. I can help." The voice was calm, but there was a tremor underneath it, like it was holding back panic with every word. I crawled towards the front of the classroom, peeking through the narrow vertical window in the door, but the hallway was empty now. "Where are you?" I whispered, unsure why I even believed the voice was real. "I'm where the clocks don't match," the voice replied instantly. "Follow the ticking, but not the ringing. Never the ringing." The intercom went silent, and I suddenly became aware of a slow, steady tick, 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 coming from somewhere down the hall. Then, just beneath that sound, something else. A low grumble, heavy and slow, like whatever it belonged to didn't have to rush. I crept to the door and cracked it open, the ticking louder now. The choice was clear. Follow the child's voice, or wait for whatever it was to find me. Now, I'm not the smartest man in the world, but I didn't have much trouble making up my mind. I drifted down the hallway, footfalls silent as a feather landing on a pillow, and made my way closer to the ticking sounds. As I did, a soft ringing sound drew my attention to a locker whose door had been removed entirely. The sound wasn't of bells, but of wind chimes. It sounded pleasant, and it reminded me of warm summer days, sweet tea, and sitting on the porch at my great-aunt's house when I was a kid. Through the open locker door, I could see another hallway. But this one was much smaller, as if it were made for a child. The walls were aged, neglected, and full of holes carved by the rot spreading up from the floor. Remembering the child's warning, I looked away and continued moving towards the ticking noises. As I turned the corner, I saw them. 2 clocks, hanging side by side above an old doorway, both battered and yellow with time. One ticked normally, its second hand sweeping in steady rhythm. The other stood frozen at 2:11, a stoic guardian of what sat under it. Beneath them was a wooden door, the kind you'd expect in a farmhouse not a school. Its knob was brass, warm to the touch, almost like it had been used just moments ago. I hesitated. Behind me, the sound of wind chimes was gone, replaced by something low and guttural, like a growl dragged through mud. I threw the door open and stepped through. On the other side was a classroom, but not like any I'd ever seen before. The walls were stripped to the studs, desks overturned, and at the center stood a chalkboard, freshly wiped clean, except for one sentence. "You're almost out of time." There was no mistaking this for anything other than what it was, a warning, and one left specifically for me. And it was right, too. As soon as I finished reading it, the second bell rang. I was out of time. I called out, begging for answers, and a crack opened in the floor beneath the chalkboard, swallowing it whole. From inside the crack came the voice of the child, and it beckoned me to follow it. "Down here, quickly. It's following you." Inside the fresh, gaping hole in the ground was nothing but a lightless void and a small voice pleading for me to hurry. I considered for a moment if this was really the best idea, but I didn't have much time to think about it. A tearing sound erupted from behind me, and I spun around reactively to see what it was. Before me stood a massive, vaguely humanoid shape made entirely of swarming flies. Maggots fell from numerous holes in its body and cascaded across the floor like a revolting rain. Each step it took caused legions of roaches to phase up through the floor tiles and scatter into the far corners of the room. But what made me turn and jump straight into that hole was the smell. A stench of putrid rot and decay drifted towards me, stinging my eyes and making me gag. I hit the ground hard, but not nearly as hard as I should have. The fall felt longer than gravity allows, yet I landed like I'd only dropped a few feet, onto the cracked linoleum covered in a thin layer of dust and old crayon drawings. It was pitch black at first, until faint blue light flickered on overhead, revealing a space that looked like a daycare? Tiny chairs, finger-painted walls, faded alphabet banners, and in the middle of the room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was a boy, maybe 8 years old, with eyes that looked too old for his face. "You made it," he said softly, like we were in a library. "It can't reach you down here. Not for now." I stepped closer, trying to steady my breathing, still tasting rot on the back of my tongue. "What the hell is going on?" I asked. The boy stood, brushing imaginary dust from his knees, and walked toward the corner where a closet door creaked open on its own. "It's not just the school," he said. "It's what nobody remembers." The boy led me through the closet into yet another hall, though this one was a straight path to a single door at the end. As we walked, he told me about that day back in 1923, when a horrific tragedy had indeed occurred. According to him, the beast I saw before had once been a student at the school. He told me how the student had wandered into an unlocked room in the basement and became trapped as the door locked itself behind her. Weeks later, when they finally found the child, she had long since passed. The door to the maintenance closet where she lived her final moments was covered in scratch marks, along with a childish drawing of a scribbled black monster. When they opened the door to that room, they unknowingly unleashed a being of pure malice upon the school. It wrought chaos and it snatched souls from the innocent. Just before we reached the door, the little boy told me he'd been trapped down there with that thing for decades, and that if I would have followed the ringing, then I would have been trapped there too. "It tricks you," he said, voice barely more than a breath. "It lures you in with whatever you missed most, and then it takes everything." We stopped in front of the door. It looked freshly painted, a pale green with a brass knob and no markings, out of place in this ruin beneath the ruin. "This is the only way out," he continued, eyes fixed on the doorknob. "But it doesn't stay open for long. Once you're through, don't look back. Don't speak. Don't answer anything that sounds like me." He turned to face me, his expression solemn, too knowing for someone so young. "It'll call for you. It'll cry. It'll beg." I hesitated, hand hovering over the knob, heart pounding so hard I could feel it behind my eyes. "What about you?" I asked. "Aren't you coming?" The boy smiled sadly and stepped backward into the shadows of the hallway. "Someone has to keep it busy." I smiled at him as I turned to walk through the door, humbled that someone so small could be so strong, and saddened that he had to be. The final hallway was darker than the deepest waters of the coldest ocean, but I stayed the course. I pushed forward for freedom from this god-forsaken place. The boy did call for me. He cried, begged me to take him with me. But I knew it wasn't really him. By the time I reached the steel door that led back to the basement, the voice was nothing but an angry snarl. I stepped through and didn't stop walking until I was out of that school and safely back at my car. I still can't get his voice out of my head. I don't know if I ever will. And truthfully, I don't know if I want to. Someone has to keep his memory alive. Thanks for joining me on tonight's journey. If you enjoyed these stories, please click the like button, tap the subscribe button, and ring that bell. It helps more people find the darkness we bring to the light. There are always more dark stories to tell. I'll see you next time. Take care.